and ideas and get to know each other a little better. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Doc.
Thank you. See if that works. So good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Flavio Silva. I am a Mayanist by training, and I would like to introduce everybody today into one aspect of the research that I've been doing in Mexico, which has to do with exchange and the movement of stones and how the study of stone tools and stone tool technology can actually help us start thinking about, broader and larger issues within archaeology. But first, before we get to talk about the Maya, I thought we could take a brief moment to talk about Mesoamerica. I understand that not everybody might be as familiar with the term. It is a very large area that we're talking about, that it includes the countries of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, and El Salvador. And obviously, as you can imagine, it is a very complex term in the sense that it does include a lot of different cultures, right? A lot of different areas and a lot of different people who might identify themselves very, very differently. The term of Mesoamerica was initially coined by Dr. Kirchhoff. And the idea was to lay down a framework for us to start thinking about a cultural area, right? And he has very specific traits that are included, that were included to encompass that region, right? Including like the use of a ball cord, the use of certain weapons, the use of certain type of rituality, the use of calendars, right? But I also like to think about this because at the end of the day, we are talking of a very complex system of different groups, right? And groups who are also literate, right? Even today, we do have evidence of different writing systems that have been identified. Not all of them have been broken in the sense that we might know what they really say, but we do know that there were a lot of different writing systems, right? So this is an area with a very complex system of cultures, right? That also, and also I wanted to just take a brief moment to talk about the chronology, the time period that we're talking about. And as we can see here, there's different time periods that are included within different groups, but specifically for the Maya, which is what I'm going to be talking about. That is one of the groups that has been represented for a very long period of time, right? And we can even have a quick discussion about what's the Maya, right? Because the Maya too, it's a very large area that includes a lot of different people, and which continues until today, right? We can go to the highlands in Guatemala and talk to Maya communities. We can go to the lowlands in Chiapas and Tabasco and talk to Maya communities. We can go to the Yucatan and do the same. So again, a very, very complex system, but also it is a group of different people who might not even identify themselves as Maya, right? Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them do feel a connection with the archaeological Mayans. Some of them don't, right? Some of them see themselves kind of a different group than what the Maya used to be. And also, again, literate groups, right? Whether we're thinking of oral history, whether we're thinking of epigraphy, it is a very complex area. We're talking of the highlands, we're talking of the lowlands. But also, these people are connected to different languages and different cultural practices, right? But we definitely have to take a quick second to think about what the Maya are and what they are not, right? And even today, this is kind of like an overview of some of the modern Mayan languages that we have. Again, just to kind of introduce everybody into what is it that we're talking about. And it is important too to start thinking about exchange, right? And the movement of things and the complexity that we can learn from the movement of goods. Obviously, archaeologically, and in that area, there's only a certain amount of evidence that we have that we can collect. One of those are stone tools, right? but we can think of feathers, we can think of shells, we can think of cacao, we can think of salt, right? And not only that, we also have a use of the same type of technology to transport goods as we could have seen 1,000, 2,000 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, right? And we see that through the epigraphy, we see that through the iconography, and we also see that through the ethnography. And I really think it's a very good practice to look at the past from the present, because we do have that evidence. And again, the Maya, right? It's a group that it's a living culture. So we can actually study them. We can actually look at them. And with a very complex system of market and exchange, right? Again, thinking of ethnography, right? And how important this type of technology continues to be very, very important to modern Mayan communities, where they will tell you like, yes, we use a megapolitan, we use a tablet. This is the way that we do things. There were no animals to carry the goods from one place to the other. Everything had to be done on foot, which also relates to how, or the type of archaeological evidence that we're going to see today. So what are some of the archaeological evidence that we have of exchange, right? And this also relates to economic anthropology, which just because of time, I'm really not going to get into. But for a really long time, especially for Maya communities, it was always thought that it was controlled by the elite, right? It was a political economy type of framework, of what we would call a paradigm, right? That how we study the past. I think in the last 20 years, that paradigm, that framework has started to change. A lot of it has to do with where we're doing archaeology now. And a lot of it has to do with the type of evidence that we're finding in archaeological context. The image to your left, it's an image from murals in Calakmul. And this murals in Calakmul were really kind of a breakthrough, because for the first time, we were seeing in iconography evidence of a market, right? Where they're saying the person of salt, the person of maize, right? The person who sold salt, the person who sold this or that. So that kind of opened, right? That kind of opened a discussion to really start thinking and talking about much broader and larger problems within anthropology and archaeology. And also other types of terms like multi-crafting started to come up in archaeology, right? Thinking how the commoner, right, had a lot more agency in what was going on, right? The commoner was not just something that was static, or an individual that was just static and was only serving the political economy, right? But the commoner actually did have, and just like today, has a much larger impact in the local economy of a place, right? And again, here's a quick illustration from the National Geographic on, markets, and again, this exchange systems and how they could have worked in the past. Also, we do have evidence at the time of conquest or contact with the Spanish, specifically the market of Tlatelolco. And that market it's very, very important for us because they left us with a large body of information of how the market system worked, right? Even Sahagún has an entire book dedicated to not necessarily exchange, but how the porter system worked, right? And again, it's those market systems did not end in the past, right? They continue. We can go to a lot of different communities and see still, the mercado, the main market, right, which might be an established place, but then we also have the tianguis, right, or the market on wheels, as we would call it, which are markets that are moving from one town to the other. In the case of Tlatelolco, that was actually a market that was established in one specific place. But we do know of the wealth of goods that were being imported and were being exchanged at this place. In the Codex Florentino, which was written by a Spanish priest, Diego de Sahagún, again, he left us with a wealth of information on how the system works. Now, we're talking about the Mexica exchange system, right? We're not talking about the Maya. which work very, very differently, but also it's a network, right? It's a system that it's connected. Things are not isolated from each other. And also we have the list of tribute, right? Which the Spaniards were very, very quick to pick on and see that, the more that they understood how this network of markets and on exchange work, the better place that they were going to be at, right? And we have evidence that tells, where they were getting feathers from, where they were getting maize, where was the cacao coming from, where was their honey, where was their salt, which were the towns that could produce this or that. So again, a wealth of information that we can use to recreate some of those markets, right? And then we also have urbanism, right? We have large cities, which is something very unique to Mesoamerica. It doesn't mean that there were not other places in the Americas with very large nodes of population, which I think there were, right? And I definitely think that they were connected. Here in the east, in the southeast, right? We see evidence of that. We have a site very close by where we can actually talk about some type of urbanism, right? And some type of exchange. We have obsidian that is coming from the west. So something to think about. And also the long-term modification of the landscape that occurred, right? But most importantly, it's also reflecting the connection between people, right? How people were connected, how people were exchanging ideas, and even by the time of the Spaniards, if I can think, for instance, of the Malinche or the Malinche, right? This woman who was a slave that was given to Cortés when first arrived in Mexico, and she spoke 2 or 3 or 4 different languages, right? So these were groups that were in contact with each other, right? For Cortés, it worked really, really well because before Cortés arrived, there had been a Spanish ship that had some issues in the Caribbean. A bunch of them ended up inland. They were captured. Most of them were killed or eaten or died from diseases, but 2 of them survived. One of them ended up actually staying with the Maya communities. He became Maya, and his kids are supposed to be the first mestizos of the Americas. But the other one, who happened to be I think it was a soldier or a priest, he ended up joining Cortés's expedition into Mexico. So he was the one that spoke one of the languages that the Malinches spoke. And they were the ones that were actually translating and talking to the local communities, right? So again, I want you to start thinking this as a very complex system that is much, much wider than when we talk about the Mexica or, and I use the term Mexica referring to the Aztecs, or the Maya, or, the Zapotecs or the Mixtecs, etc. So why stone technology, right? Why should we look at stones and how can they help us understand these larger questions related to society? Because I think stones are key to understanding exchange. Also, stones preserve, right? And stones allow us to look at other type of questions like technology, right? Start thinking about communities of practice, right? How people share things. Something that we do in archaeology, experiential learning. I was just doing it this morning with Cynthia and Alex in their class when we were having a kind of a small lab on lithic analysis, right? So yes, lithics has the advantage that it preserves very, very well, and we have the entire sequence of production, right? We have the whole sequence of event, and we can actually recreate where they obtain the stone and actually know where the life history of the object ended, right? So it can give us a lot of information for us as archaeologists and anthropologists, right? And now, why are stones important for the Maya? Like I always tell people, well, to me, it amazes me to see that a lot of the times we don't think of stone tool technology as something that goes beyond a flake or an artifact, right? Specifically for Mesoamerican communities. Let's think of a vitamin T. I always like to use that term. What's vitamin T? Tacos, tortillas, tamales. We all love that, right? Well, we wouldn't have any of that if it wasn't for the nixtamalización, right? which is a process where you leave the corn. And let me move this here for a second. Where you leave the corn soaking overnight in lime, right? If you do not soak the corn with the lime, you're not gonna get tortillas. You're not gonna get tamales. You're not gonna get any of that good stuff that we all like, right? So again, salt is a rock. We eat it, right? The production of limestone for the Maya area, which is extremely important. It was being used to create stuccos, right? Masonry, right? And obviously certain objects that are related to the elite, but also are reflections of the technology and the crafting that occurred in the past. So yes, for me, stone tool technology is very, very important, and it's something that goes beyond an object. We eat it, we still eat it today. Right? So now exchange, right? How are things getting around? Right? We go to these archaeological sites, and all we see is a shell of what it used to be. Well, because we have evidence of long distance exchange in the Maya region. And not only that, we even have description of how important exchange was to Maya communities, right? We know, and we see it today, that they do have an inclination towards exchange, towards a market system. And we also have descriptions. Columbus came in contact with a Mayan ship, right? The first contact of the Americas was actually with a Maya community. And there he kind of describes to the characteristics of the ship that he encountered, right? The goods that were being transported, right? Obsidian, metals, cotton, and also, you know, the technology, maritime technology that included, you know, this canoe, which wasn't really just a canoe, right? It was a very, very large ship. And also to start thinking about the different types of technology. It's going to be a canoe that is going to be used in rivers. It's going to be very, very used in a ship that is going to be used out in sea, right? So again, this wealth of evidence of how important exchange was, the network that we can see of people moving from one place to the other, and the goods that were being moved, right? For the Maya region, we also have evidence of the many goods that were being imported and exported specifically out of. We have obsidian, we have salt, we have feathers, right? When you see this great feather dresses that you know, for the Mexica, for instance, they were made with this little bird, the quetzal, right? Well, we know that those birds were coming from tropical regions, right? The Maya region is one of those tropical areas. Also flint, right? The entire Maya region it's an area of sedimentary rock, right? And also the movement of gold that wasn't coming from the Maya region itself, but it was definitely being moved through it. And we do know in the case of Chichen Itza, for instance, where people have done studies to look at the elements of some of the offerings made out of metals and gold, and they were coming from places as far as South America, right? Kind of a side note, and I always like to tell this story. The Spaniards, again, made these books kind of telling the Spanish crown of what could be exploited in the Americas. And one of those books actually comes from Michoacan, from the Tarascos. And they talk about hundreds of ships of the Pacific off the coast of Michoacan that were coming out from Peru, right? From basically the Incas. The Incas brought up metallurgy, and the Mexicans were shipping down spondylus, shells, right? So again, a very complex system of exchange that goes far and beyond what we would call Mesoamerica and even the Maya region. And of course, now getting to the archaeology, we have evidence of roads, right? And they can be found not only in the Maya region and Mesoamerica. Obviously, I'm only going to talk today about the Maya region, but you know, Chaco Canyon, places in Arizona where we've actually identified pre-Hispanic roads, right? You go to South America, the whole Inca system of roads that goes all the way from the Patagonia, basically all the way up to Colombia, right? So a very complex system, and it's all connected. It's a network. Things are not isolated. right? And the more we more about it, the more that we see these connections. And in archaeology, we have specifically two kinds of roads, right? What we would call an intracyte road. Those are roads that are connected architectural groups within an archaeological site. They can be connecting a temple to a specific group. They can be connecting a cenote, right, a sinkhole to a specific area. They could be connecting areas what we would call palaces, right, places where the elite was residing. And then we also have evidence of intracyte roads, right? These are roads that are connecting different archaeological sites. These are also very unique in the sense that it really can make us think about what sites were being connected with, which sites were being connected with which sites, and which sites were not connected by those roads, right? Perhaps reflecting political and economic relations between different sites, right? Between different kingdoms. And we also have evidence of markers, right? Where they were telling people, you stay in this road, it's going to take you to such and such place, right? So again, a very complex system of exchange and actual evidence of roads, right? So with all this in mind, what I was trying to do is create a research that included different lines of evidence, right? Looking at the material from as many different perspectives as possible, with the idea that I would have different lines of information. And I opened myself up to thinking about household archaeology, thinking about economy, thinking about exchange, and utilizing different techniques, like archaeometric techniques, specifically obsidian. Why is obsidian important for me? Well, obsidian is really unique in the sense that we can really pinpoint where things are coming from, right? Every source of obsidian is different. It's kind of like a fingerprint. We can actually tell where things are coming from. Very, very precise. Some people use visual analysis. I personally don't agree with it. If you're colorblind, you know, if you know, our perceptions are going to be very, very different. There are some people who are actually really good at it, and they use it in conjunction with archaeometric tools. Me, I'm not good at visual analysis, so I rely completely on archaeometric techniques, right? But we have other type of tools like soil analysis, right? Looking at seeds, looking at plants, which can also help us understand the different exchange systems that you do have in an area. So now we're going to get into my research. This is the area that I've been working at, and this is located in the lowlands of Chiapas and Tabasco, around a site that is called Palenque. Palenque, again, it's very well known for its wealth as far as epigraphy. Architecturally, it's beautiful. And also we have very large nodes of population, like the site of Chiniquija, where I have also had the opportunity to work for years. Obviously, my research is not all by myself. I was part of a larger team of researchers, specifically from the UNAM, the National Autonomous University of Mexico City. One of the things we did initially was basically start walking the area. We wanted to know what there was, right? You need to know what there is in order to study it. And we found a very complex sediment pattern of archaeological sites. And obviously, a lot of other sites that were outside of our initial study area, but includes some sites that maybe you've heard, like Yaxchilán, Pomona, and Piedras Negras, which again are much larger nodes of population. But the sites that I was working at were Palenque, Chiniquija, Boca Chiniquija, Linda Vista, La Cascada, Chincalá, Chipá. Anyways, a very large area. We have encountered over 600 archaeological sites. And again, just for those of you who've never heard of Palenque before, Palenque is the main node of population there, right? It's the largest. It's the largest in the area. It did have, writing, epigraphy. It has an emblem glyph. We know of its influence in the region. We also have a very, very good idea of how the site developed. And also, its location was probably key in the maintenance and the creation of a very complex system of exchange and even markets, right? A lot of times we haven't necessarily found where the markets were, but there's good evidence, again, seeing ethnography on where some of those markets could have existed in the past. This side of Chiniquija, again, same thing. It's a site with epigraphy, with temples, palaces. And my work really concentrated, which I didn't mark here, in the middle area behind the palace. But mostly, I ended up working a workshop that was located on the outside of the site. And what really got me interested in thinking about lithics and production. This is the overall location for the site. There's a very, very rich history of epigraphy and the history of the elite, right? They're all fighting with each other. Some of them were friends. They were carving their stories on stones, and that's what we know of today. A lot of the history for the sites too has unfortunately been lost, but a lot of the history of the region, it's well known. But it's obviously, this is a political history, right? It's kind of like now thinking if we were to read a book from a book that was written by the president in Washington, right? It would probably be a very different opinion than what somebody like us in here would be writing, right? And a very different perspective. But the Bacaal, that's the site of Palenque, right? Palenque had two different names, La Canja and Bacaal, right? And it was supposed to be the family of the bone, from what we know. And La Canja is the place of the waters. Yes. If you ever get a chance to go, you have the Otolun rivers, you have all these little creeks and rivers that are going through it. And it's just a beautiful place, right? So, and this is the area that I've been working at. Again, over 600 archaeological sites. Now the area is much larger. It's about 670 square kilometers that we have done field surveys. And we've been able to locate two ports of entry. I guess on the eastern side, we have the site of Boca Chiniquija, which is the one on the right. And on the left-hand side by the Tulija River, we have a site where we do found what looks to be the port, right? And this is important because this were probably the places of entry. Again, we have two types of roads in the Maya region. We have the fluvial routes and the terrestrial routes. And they were probably used depending on the time of the year, also depending on whether or not you could cross by. And all those little points are all the different archaeological sites that we found, right? What we call the settlement pattern of the region. So as we were doing the survey, something that became very, very obvious is that we were finding linear features associated to some of these archaeological sites, right? Whether there were small houses or whether there were very big, what we would call administrative centers, we would find these features on the landscape. We were able to excavate some of them. So in a sense, we did have the archaeological evidence first, right? We knew where the sites were. We knew where the roads were. We just wanted to know if there were really roads, if they were connecting all the sites, right? And then we also wanted to create what's called a least cost path analysis, which is a model that's created through GIS, through Geographic Information System, that basically tells us what is the path that you can take that is the easiest, that is going to require the least amount of work. And it has a lot of different applications in today's society, right? They actually use them to create roads between different communities. And whole and behold, something that we did find is yes, they're actually, the roads in the area are located in the same places where they would be placed today, right? The places of least cost path, right? Also, we were able to find out that the administrative centers are actually located every 4 to 8 kilometers. Why is this important? Well, 4 to 8 kilometers, depending on the time of the year, right? Depending on the landscape, are usually the amount of distance that a porter can walk at least in a day, right? So this is probably reflecting the areas where people could go from one side to the other within a day comfortably and move different goods. Also, we're able to locate what we will call buffer zones, right? Areas where there's no archaeological sites. For some evidence, whether it's the landscape or perhaps political reasons, we did not find any archaeological remains. So we are thinking of those areas as being buffer zones, right? Frontiers, areas that are marking some type of political control or social differentiation, right? This is an example of the initial roads that we were finding. Here you're going to see the word Sigbabi. Obviously, as we were doing the surveys, we were asking the local communities. They tend to be Maya Choles or Maya Celtales, and they refer to this feature in the landscape as the road of the ancestors, right? Or a Sigbabi, which is a white road. It's the same term as the Sagbi, right? Which is in Maya Yucatan. And here are some images of one, the Usumacinta River, right? And this is right at Boca Chiniquija, where the site of Boca Chiniquija that I showed initially is located at. And also, again, you can see the roads, right? This is how they look on the surface. And even bridges, right? Areas where you could cross, where you could go across inundated areas. Now, the unique characteristic of the roads in this area is that they took advantage of a natural fracture in the geomorphology, right? There's a fracture that for some reason, they probably started using initially to go into the area, and then they started settling next to it. And if you look at the maps that we created in the area, you can see a pattern that it's linear, right? All the archaeological sites, in a sense, are following these fractures, are following these roads. Right? And here's an image. This is one of my favorite roads in the area. That site called San Juan Chancalaito. Obviously, the inversion of work into this geological features tend to be at the entrances of the sites. But again, this is how the road looks. And once you find the correct road that they were using, you just start finding all the archaeological sites. It's very, very clear. So now you're going to be saying, right, what do we find? Well, in order to understand, so again, I had two different sets of data, right? I had the archaeological evidence and the GIS of the roads. And then I also had access to a collection of obsidian from the entire region. Now, as I said before, we started kind of walking the area first. So a lot of the collections that we had was from surface materials, right? So if we found obsidian, we collected it, right? So we did not necessarily have obsidian from all the archaeological sites, and also at sites where we were able to do either STPs, which are shallow test pits, which are very small excavations to see what there is, right? But again, obsidian has the advantage that one, we wanted to see what kind of artifacts they were, and we wanted to see where they were coming from. And the idea was that this would also help us to understand the exchange system, right? We have evidence of prismatic blade technology, which is very, very unique too, in the sense that it requires a very high level of skill. You need to have somebody who's basically doing the same job their entire life. And again, through the Florex Codex, we do have evidence of these individuals that were part of the market system, and they were moving from one area to the next, and they would be the ones to create this place. Kind of a side story here. They also mentioned that they would have a little whistle as they were going through the counts. The guys who were making the prismatic blades. And today, if you ever spend any time in Mexico and Guatemala, sometimes you're gonna hear these guys with a whistle walking down the street, and they're the ones that sharpen the knives, right? which I think it's just an interesting and unique detail of possible influence, right, from pre-Hispanic times. So I ended up having a sample that included different archaeological sites. It ended up being a sample of 1,238 artifacts. But in 12, there were 37 archaeological sites. In 12 of the archaeological sites, we found evidence of prismatic blade technology, right? And these are not necessarily big sites. Some of the sites were a small little, household in the middle of nowhere. So either they knew how to do it, how to do this technology, or there was somebody who was actually coming through and doing this for them, which again relates to this whole idea of political economy, right? And how the elite were controlling all the production for the region. Using XRF, we were able to create different groups, and we did find the majority of the obsidian is coming from El Chayal, right? El Chayal, Ixtepeque, and Jilotepeque, but really El Chayal. El Chayal is controlling everything, which is very common in the Maya region. El Chayal was definitely a source that was very, very important. But we also found obsidian from places as far as Pachuca, Pénjamo, and Zaragoza, right? Which is all the way up to basically Western Mexico, right? And out of the whole sample of 1,338, there were only 4 prismatic blades that I do not know where they come from. And that probably has to do just because not all the sources have been sourced, right? In order for us to know where something is coming from, we need to have the chemical signature for that source. And even today, a few years ago, well, not long ago, but apparently a few years ago, I was talking to Stephen Shackley, who was my advisor, and he was telling me that he had found a source in Arizona, in an area where he had walked for years, and he didn't even know that it was there. And he ended up finding a new source not long ago. So again, not all the sources have been sourced yet, right? And the diversity of the sources, right? Yes, El Chayal is controlling everything. Everything is coming from El Chayal in Guatemala. And I'm going to show you here in a minute where El Chayal is located. And this are just some of the different type of artifacts that we found, right? We found quartz, we found reduction flakes. And then obviously most of it were prismatic blades. Apparently they're making the prismatic blades and then they break them into pieces and they're hafting them, right? There's evidence of hafting. So start thinking about production and technology and knowledge, right? Communities of practice. There was no prismatic blade 101. They learned from each other, right? So again, it's a community who are using the same type of tools, right? And also the standardizing of specific goods, right? Did I have a biface? Yeah, I had a biface, one. But again, most of it are bifacial, prismatic blades. Right, and this is just the different fragments, right, that we found as the prismatic blades. Where the proximal end, that's the end that is closest to the place where they actually pressure flake it, and also again complete. Right, we did have some context where we actually found blades that they just had them there. They were not used at all.
Is this evidence of failures in the production process, or is this just leftovers from their use life, or can you tell from your analysis?
Well, they probably just didn't get to use them. Some places had more access. We do know that there's a difference in the access to obsidian. Like for instance, the site of Palenque, there's a lot of obsidian, right? They had access to obsidian. So yes, in Palenque you'll find, for instance, the excavation in the palace where they maybe even just used it once and throw it out and use the complete piece. There was a place in Chiniquija, because I was there when this was excavated, where we actually found what we think is a kitchen. What do we think is a kitchen? Because it had a brownstone and different brownstone objects. And then we found in one corner of the house, there was like 20 different blades that were just there. They were probably just keeping them in there. So that's probably what it was. It was probably just, they were just waiting. Because these are not ritual-like context, right? These are not tombs. My study was really more in the rural communities, right? The regular individuals. And even the place that I excavated, we didn't find any evidence of what you would call elite paraphernalia. There was no writing. There was no ritualized objects that you only find in the palace, right? Oh yeah, so this is, again, the sources, right? This is the area and the sites where the obsidian was coming from. And as you can see by percentage where the obsidian was coming from, right? As far as Pénjamo, Zaragoza, Pachuca, Quilotepeque, Chayal, and Ixtepeque. And also when you look at this image, I want you to start thinking about the social aspect of the materials, right? This is not like they were just basically getting a porter and be like, okay, you're going all the way down to the lowlands in Chiapas, right? No, they probably went down to the first market. They were all polyhedral cores, right? That's the name of the cores where you get the blades from. And then from there, they probably started being redistributed. So that's also one of the important or very unique aspects of lithic studies, specifically obsidian, where you can recreate the life history of an object, right? You can actually start thinking of all the different places where this stopped in order for it to make it all the way to the place where I was working at, right? Which is the end of the life history of an object.
Good question, Flavio. The fact that you have so few completely reduced cores, does it suggest that you simply didn't get any like actual distribution centers?
I just think it has to do with what we found, yeah, and where the excavations are being done, yeah. I mean, like they're supposed to be they're going to make a new campsite at Palenque. And the place where they want to make it is full of obsidian. I am sure they're going to find they're probably going to find complete nodules. Yeah. So I think that just has to do with the type of evidence that we found. You know, the places that we've excavated and the mittens that, the trash mittens that we've excavated. But yeah, I mean, I'm not even going to get to talk about like the excavations that I did on the workshop. But I mean, it was all flint. It was all chert.
Essentially, you have almost no reduction plates. You very reduced percentage. Household, you get plates. That's all they get, right?
Yeah, but I mean, we do have, like the entire sequence. But yeah, no, we have exhaustive cores. We have basically the cores, the polyhedral cores at the end of their life, right? That they threw, and we even found some on surface, right? But yeah, I just think that has to do with what what the material we have recovered from excavations and field surveys.
There's an interesting trend in the southeast, this part of the world, where you'll find these objects that generate use life of stone tools in the archaic, where they're going to Tallahassee quartzite quarries, and they'll quarry the stuff. And as they move across the landscape, they're sort of overbuilding these sort of large size tools, utilitarian tools. And as they get all the way down to the south, where the coastal plain agate, the citronelle quarries are, they'll throw that tool away, snap out a core of citronelle or what have you to bring with them, and you can trace that back up. So we find TQ worn out materials across the landscape in the citronelle region, and then citronelle worn out tools up in the TQ area sometimes.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that. I mean, it's something very similar. Yeah. So here, for everybody just to see, so Boca Chiniquija, it's a site that is next to Usumacinta, right? And that one was excavated by Nicoleta Maestri, and she excavated an area that was basically next to the river, and she found a lot of variation in the sources, right? And like you said, she did have the entire chain of production, right? She had the exhaustive cores, the reduction flakes, and the prismatic blades that were used, right? And the other one was Chiniquija. In Chiniquija, most of the excavations were from a mitten that was behind the palace. But again, this is a place where they're just throwing the trash. It is not an area where they were necessarily making blades, okay? And the workshop that I worked at too. And again, just to give an example, right? Pachuca, which is all the way in the center of Mexico, there's not as much obsidian, but the obsidian that we're finding, yeah, it's close to this ports of entry, right? We did find it in areas where there's possible either redistribution or actually production activity, right? So yeah, this is how we can start thinking about the life history. These are some of the objects that we have found at Chiapas. On the one hand, right, the difference in the materials that we can see of the tools of production, and then to the different materials that they were using. This mosaic here is it's pyrite, right? And those were used to create pyrite mirrors. This is an example here. This is not from us, the one on the bottom right. But it's an example of how those mirrors actually looked. And that was found in a cave, right? The excavations in a cave. But again, the multi-crafting, right? Because that actually, all of those artifacts that you're seeing here, those came out of the workshop that I excavated. And we do have hard hammers of different sizes, cobblestones that they're using to nap. We have also a very large differentiation in the skill of those individuals. We have things that look like somebody was learning, probably a kid or somebody like me who's new with this, you know? So that's why I started thinking about communities of practice. We have polishers, we have beaters to make, for instance, paper, right? So yes, those communities and those households were taking part in different parts of production, and we're not as isolated from the market system, but definitely had a lot more agency into it, right? And this also can help us think about the movement of other goods, right? For instance, ceramics. I was actually talking this morning to Alex about that. The ceramics in the region of Palenque are all being, there's things that are being imported, but also most of it is being produced locally. And there's a very large amount of ceramics that have volcanic ash. The volcanic ash, it's coming from the highlands. It's coming from areas where maybe the obsidian is coming from. But again, very, very large quantities. And again, a very complex system of exchange that we don't even fully understand, right? This is just the ash, right? Honey, right? I actually, too, in Chiapas, we did find what I think could be a lid to one of these containers for beekeeping, right? And we do have evidence, even in epigraphy, of the importance of beekeeping. Yeah, there was no sugar in the Americas, but we had honey, right? A different way to get sweets. And also today, for those of you who are interested, and I know you can get it on Amazon, they do sell Yucatan honey. It's very expensive. I don't think I've ever tried it, but it's very, very expensive. And the bee too, because there's this whole movement in the Yucatan trying to, one, revive and preserve that beekeeping technology, because the American bee actually did not have a stinger, or does not have a stinger. So it's a different bee, and it doesn't produce as much honey as the one that was introduced. Cotton, right? Cotton production, and we do know in our area, the area where I work, it was extremely important, and we can see that in the iconography, right? But we can also see that in living communities and in places where we've actually been able to find textiles, like caves, or even, for instance, in Chichen, right? And in the cenote of Chichen, they did recover both paper and textiles in that area. And as I said earlier too, right? We never think, for instance, that the movement of wood, right? Precious woods, which they were probably coming from areas like the jungle. Shell, right? A spondylus, which is a shell also that's being imported. This shell that I put here, that was actually found as part of the offering of the Reina Roja, the Red Queen, who was found in Palenque. Think of dry fish, right? There's a lot of ethno-historical accounts on how, you know, a lot of the goods that were being moved from the Pacific and obviously from the Gulf of Honduras and Mexico in the Caribbean were dry fish and dry goods. And again, I always think of feathers, right? A lot of the feathers that were being used in pre-conquest period were coming from this area, right? Veracruz, Chiapas, Tabasco, Yucatan, Belize. I mean, that whole area of the jungle. And this is this wooden, it's a mirror holder, and sometimes they're seen in codex basis. You know, you have the great Kahula, how he's looking at himself in the mirror, in a small mirror, and you have this kind of like, it looks like a little midget who's holding the mirror. Well, this is an example of one of those mirror holders that was actually found in an inundated context, and that's why it was preserved. But also, again, thinking of looking from the present into the back, right? To really start thinking how people have agency and how those technologies, how those ways of viewing the world have persisted, right? And even though how there was a conquest, it was in a sense ambivalent, right? And how people too have preference for certain goods, right? I know, again, I'm Mexican. I know my grandma, my abuela, she would go and buy pots from the same person whenever she needed one, because they sold the good one, right? So again, people do have agency. People can decide who they're going to get things from and where to get them from. But also how we have a large evidence of the technology, right? In the continuation of the way that things are being exchanged, and how families and households take part into this production and into the exchange. And something that came out later too, that I found really unique, in the sense that sometimes we don't really think on how our work might be looking at modern uses, right? So we ended up finding out when we were doing our service, specifically in certain areas, not all of them, but in certain areas, we would start seeing migrants, right? It's the same, again, because of this policy of deterrence by the US government, where migrants have to use the routes that otherwise they would never take. Guess what routes they're using? They're using the same routes that were used by the Mayas in the past, right? A lot of those roads and a lot of those routes are actually have become modern roads and modern highways, right? Why? Because they're located in the best place. It is not for granted that you have communities in Mexico and they will usually have an archaeological site within it or right next to it. Also, if you ever have a chance to go to this highway and through Orizaba in that area, you're gonna see the whole time the mounds, the archaeological mounds. That road, it's an old road, right? Or even if you guys ever go to Mexico and you hear, oh, you're in the Calzada de Tlalpan. That calzada, that is the same road that the Mexica were using at the time of conquest.
So you only have, oh, there you go. They say you have time for a few questions before other questions.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, any comments, I'll be more than happy. But yeah, thank you. And again, a lot of people took part of this work. You know, it's not just me. Yeah, Alex.
One question I see in your chart that there's very little Ishmeteke.
The what, sir?
The very little Ishmeteke obsidian. And of course, that's Kohan, Ishmeteke source. And it's an interesting situation where the Kohan kingdom collapses. The Kohan obsidian suddenly becomes much more widespread across all of Mesoamerica. It becomes the dominant obsidian, basically, for the rest of Mesoamerica. In all of the Maya area. The fact that you have so little doesn't mean that your network, like your trade network, basically collapses in the 8th century, and basically all these sites they are like shutting down. Because otherwise, you can see a lot more Ishmeteke.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. Yeah. Why all, El Chayal too? I mean, El Chayal, as you saw, it's like 90, I think it was like 96%, right?
Yeah, that looks like a very sort of Yucatan oriented classic period system. But some of your sites are thermoplastic, like Chiapas.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I don't really know what that means yet, and hopefully I'll find out. But I mean, I do know for the classic, El Chayal seems to be kind of like the dominant. But yeah, maybe it's something that has to do with chronology, right? Maybe if we have access to materials that come from, because another thing, the area where I work, you have all this work that is being done in the classic period. Until recently with Mata, who's doing all the work for the pre-classic or the formative, right? And then two, if you think about it, there's no post-classic research. And the sites are there. I mean, the only one who did research there in some of the post-classic sites has been Rance and Bishop. So I think it's just, I think a lot of it is where we're looking, right? Right now with the whole Tren Maya, the Maya train that they're trying to build in Mexico, they're doing what we would call here CRM, right? Cultural resource management. So maybe some of those sites, if we're able to have good information and access to it, You know, because I'm sure a lot of them are not going to be all classic. It's probably going to be things that are going to be post-classic or you know.
That's what they should report. They're still using those roads in Past
And then,
you
yeah.
can see all that big obsidian because it goes all the way to Mexico.
Yeah.
But if you're not getting all the bag activity, some people are actually bypassing your whole network.
And it could be.
Coast,
Yeah.
for example.
Which again is seen, right? For instance, the site of Piedras Negras that is located close by, like they at some point they stop having access to jade, right? And then you have Yachilan and it's full of jade, right? And obviously Yachilan was like, you guys are not getting anything anymore. So yes, that could be an answer. But as of now, with the information that I have, I do not know yet. If that makes sense.
Any more questions? All right, well,
Oh, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.